Welcome to the Tough Decisions Network for Entrepreneurs. I'm Dan Hanford, and my wife, Danae, and I interview successful people sharing stories behind tough decisions that they've had to make along their journey as an entrepreneur. Before we get started, let's hear from one of our sponsors.
Attention established business owners, entrepreneurs, and coaches. Do you want to make a big impact and big money? Become known as the expert authority in your field and attract more of the right clients. This is J.V. Crum III, host of the Conscious Millionaire podcast, and I want to share with you the 9 proven steps I've personally used to produce over 1,500 episodes and attract 12 million listeners. Download the podcast roadmap with the 9 proven steps to podcasting success. Get it right now by going to consciousmillionaire.com/start podcasting. Again, go to consciousmillionaire.com/start podcasting.
On the podcast with us today is Jason Bay. He's been an entrepreneur since 2008, but he's currently working to grow company revenue through marketing and sales efforts at Blissful Prospecting. So thank you, Jason, for being with us. We're looking forward to talking with you.
Thanks for having me on. This is the first time I've been interviewed by 2 people at once. So this should be fun.
We're looking forward to it as well. I want you, Jason, to first start us off by kind of giving us a little bit of a background as an entrepreneur and what your current focus is right now.
Sure. Yeah. My current focus is on Blissful Prospecting, and the sort of how my entrepreneurial journey, I guess, has progressed is that, in college, I started out running a house painting business as a freshman. And that was completely like a 180 from what I planned on doing in college. I originally was a forensics scientist major, and I took some classes, found out that I didn't want to do that and sit in the lab all day. And I ended up working with that company, College Works Painting, all throughout college, and became their marketing director. So I moved down to Southern California and got to learn for about 3 years or so about, marketing for a company that was about $30 million. And that was about in 2013, end of 2013 was when I left to actually start my own business. And I wanted to actually start my own house painting company. And that's something we'll talk about later today. That was my first big entrepreneurial failure. But the reason why Blissful Prospecting was started is that I ended up, doing a lot of marketing, digital marketing, freelancing and consulting. And I was like, hey, I want to work with other businesses, and started experimenting a lot with LinkedIn and, cold email and how to prospect. And I just noticed that a lot of small businesses under 50 employees didn't really know how to prospect. They didn't really have the systems or know what technology to use. And that's why my wife, Sarah, and I started Blissful Prospecting.
That's great. So I want to talk to you a little bit about a tough decision that you've had as an entrepreneur. And, one, let's start with that did not have that good of an outcome, and maybe some of the lessons that you learned through that tough decision.
Yeah. So the first business I started was a business called Smart Home Painting. And that was, like I said, when I left College Works Painting. And the first tough decision I had to make, and I think most people go through this when they start their first business, you can do it one of 2 ways. You can sort of start the side hustle, and then as you start to replace your income, quit your job, or you can just go all in, right? Quit your job, borrow money, or use your savings or whatever you got to do and just sort of risk it all. I was fortunate that my parents were able to lend us $25,000. And the tough decision that I had to make there at the beginning was, do I do this myself or do I do it with a business partner? And it was the first business I had started outside of a franchise, type business like I was doing in college. Because I was running a business, with College Works Painting, but it wasn't something I had 100% equity over, So this is the first foray into that, and it didn't work out. And the tough decision at the beginning, and I ended up choosing to go into business with someone because I felt like I had to have a business partner doing it, instead of looking at how are we going to complement each other and what is this other person bringing to the table that maybe I'm not. And looking back at that, I should have just done it myself. But what ended up happening that I ended up having to leave the business. He took it over. The business ended up failing, and we ended up owing a bunch of money to my parents. So I learned a lot, primarily who you get into business with, and making sure that it's for the right reasons and not just because you feel like you need a business partner because you don't want to do it alone.
So what was it through that particular situation, how has that shaped how you make decisions moving forward as an entrepreneur?
To me, it's really looking at being very careful about who you choose to go into business with, and then also how much equity that you give away when you start a business. I'm just of the firm belief that you shouldn't give away any equity unless you're getting something really valuable in return. So if that's a high growth startup, maybe you need funding. Maybe you need an advisor that has specific industry experience. Make sure that whatever you're doing justifies the equity that you're giving up.
What was it that you felt like you needed when you started that business that caused you to go out and look for a partner? And if those were actual true deficits, then how have you made up for those things at the other business that you've started?
Yeah, so to answer your first question, the thing that I thought I needed, because I had never really gone out fully on my own before, was I just thought I needed someone to do it with. I was like, this is so much work. How could I possibly do it myself? That was
so really lack of confidence in your own self and being able to do it on your own.
Lack of confidence. I read a lot of articles about, should you go into business with someone, should you not? And at the time, I would say that I was unaware of my abilities and what I had done. And I did not take in consideration that this was someone that I had met, and I was, his manager when I was doing College Works painting in college. So I didn't take in consideration that I had a lot more experience actually managing people and running like a sales team and all of the marketing experience that I got as a marketing director. I was bringing a lot more to the table. And when I started realizing that, with business, it's very simple when you think about it, right? I mean, the business has to be finding customers and producing revenue, and then you got to fulfill on the promises that you're making to your customers. When I started realizing that, hey, like, I'm not necessarily doing 3/4 to 80% of the actual work in terms of hours, but in terms of the output and results, it's really primarily coming from a lot of my efforts. That's when I started to really notice the imbalance. And really what I've noticed, and this is why I'm in business with my wife now, is that we complement each other in ways that I have not gotten in previous business relationships. And I think one of the big things, I mean, you two would know this, like when you get into business with someone like you're married to, you don't have to worry about the personal goals not being aligned. So like my wife, Sarah, and I, we have the same exact personal goals. We have the same level of ambition for what we want out of our personal lives. So it doesn't affect our decision-making in a negative way at all, because we want to accomplish the same thing. In terms of the deficit, me personally, I'm a fairly introverted person, even though I do all of the sales in our company. And Sarah really pushes me in that way. She's very extroverted, very social. And it's really forced me to take networking more serious, take who I surround myself with more serious, et cetera. And she's a much more process-driven person than I am as well. So we really complement each other in those ways. That's really what I probably needed when I started my first business and maybe didn't know it. But that's how we've made up for the deficits now, I guess, to answer your question.
So let's shift here now to a different tough decision that you've had to make along this journey as an entrepreneur, and one that really had a very, very good outcome, or an outcome that was much better than you had expected originally, and some of the lessons that you learned through that one.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. So this just happened actually. This is last maybe July or August. I had been for about 3 years or so doing the whole freelancing and consultant thing. And the tough part about doing that is that your work really isn't very consistent. And I was relying on one particular client was typically producing about 2/3 to 3/4 of the revenue that my little freelancing business was producing. And I knew that that wasn't good to rely that much on one client. And I did that for a couple of years, just doing one-off projects for other people and not finding sustainable ways to work on an ongoing basis. So I made a tough decision to say, hey, you know what? Like, I can't rely on this one client this much. I need to make sure that the work I'm doing with them is not making them too reliant on me. And I need to treat what I'm doing with them more like a business instead of as a contractor or a freelancer, and say, hey, here are the particular services my business provides, which in this case, I really wanted to focus on lead generation. And I need to go find other clients that I can produce and do this same exact service for. And that's how Blissful Prospecting was started. And it's worked out really well. I mean, we have over a dozen clients now from when I had a couple, as a freelancer. And we're working now with people on an ongoing monthly basis instead of doing one-off projects. So I think transitioning into a business model that's more of a recurring monthly model where you get to work with clients on an ongoing basis, because it's so much hard work to get new clients in an agency, type business instead of these one-off projects. That's probably been the biggest win
I want to talk about that a little bit too, because I might be a little bit confused here and I want to make sure that we understand what you had done before. So before you were doing the same thing in lead generation, you just hadn't made it a business yet?
Well, it was a business. It was Jason Bay Consulting.
Okay.
And I had a couple virtual assistants and things like that. But there was no formalized service options. It was all custom work, right? Hire me for, pay me $50, $100 an hour, hourly rate to do lead gen for you and digital marketing and that sort of stuff. It wasn't.
So there was no continuity to it.
Yeah, it wasn't like, when you go to a marketing agency that's been around for a little while, their services are very packaged and it's typically very productized. None of what I was doing was very productized. It was all custom work. I did everything from website design to copywriting to lead gen. I did all kinds of stuff. Really anything that I could do for money at that time I was doing.
So you weren't very focused. It was just kind of like whatever you could do to pay the bills, if you will.
Yeah, because getting over that next hump would require me to take a risk, right? And start looking for other clients more aggressively. And then to also say, hey, I need more people to help me out to do this. So, more revenue is great, but then it also, your risk increases too when you start to have a decent burn rate where you got to pay employees and things like that to help you out.
I know exactly what you're talking about there.
Yeah.
It definitely, the more income you have creates more challenges and more issues and more problems. And again, at the same time, more risk, so you have to kind of, tread lightly and make sure when you continue to go full bore, you have all your systems and procedures and processes in place to make sure that it's a smooth oiled machine, if you will.
Yep.
So I want you to share with us some strategies that you like to do when facing a tough decision as an entrepreneur.
I think one of the biggest things is don't rush the decision. So anytime we're making a tough decision now, especially in our business, we want to sleep on it. So make sure you at least get a good night's rest and wait 24 hours if you have to make that decision. I don't like to make any decisions in moments where we're either really excited or really stressed. I don't want to make any decisions in either of those two mind states. The other sort of way that I frame things too, I think people tend to think of things as, how will this decision affect myself? And then how will it affect another person? I think you also have to think about how it's going to affect like the relationship with that person too. I really think there's three parts to that. And a good example would be like my wife and I, making decisions like in our business, like we have to think about like what we want. And we have to think about maybe what's good for an employee or a client, but we also have to think about the business as a separate entity too, and like what's best for the business. So making sure that it aligns in all three of those areas. And then besides that, I love going on long walks. I think long walks are, hugely underrated, or hitting the float tank, something where you can spend an hour, hour and a half just clearing your head and actually think in silence or with a podcast or whatever it is, just kind of shelter yourself from the outside world for a little bit. That typically helps me.
So Jason, we like to ask a couple or actually three kind of quick hitting questions that we call the trifecta. So I want to get that started and ask you, what's your favorite technology that you use in your business that makes your life easier and you use it regularly?
It's a tough one to give one. I would say the big one right now is an app called Guru, and it's getguru.com. And what it does is it's a Google Chrome extension where it's essentially like a wiki for your company. So you can just right from the Chrome extension, click on it, and you can document like every process in your business. So when you hire someone, you can create a user account for them and then share the tasks or the directions or the wiki file that you want with them. And it'll have like all the step-by-step directions for how to do their task in a way that you can access it while you actually have a window open. So instead of opening like a new tab and looking at a Google Doc or whatever it is, it's a very systemized way to keep all the tasks and processes in one place in your business.
The next thing I want to know is what is your favorite quote that you kind of tell yourself on a regular basis that has helped you as an entrepreneur?
I really love this one. It's from Jason Fried, who is the co-founder at Basecamp. And he said, the true test of how bad you want something is whether you're willing to give up something else to make room. And I think that's just a good reminder. I'm very big on minimalism. And to me, minimalism is not like getting rid of everything. It's just not putting a lot of stock in things that you don't really value and being honest with yourself about that. And with business, I think you could take that same approach. It's like, do you really need this extra shiny thing? Whether that's a tool or some other idea you want to pursue or some other thing that you could do that's a one-off thing that doesn't actually help move the business forward. Just staying very minimalistic with your approach.
So the next question is about your favorite book. So do you have a book that you have read recently or in your past that has really helped you take yourself to the next level as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, it's, I'm assuming that we cannot use profanity on this podcast.
I prefer not.
So it's a book called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a 4-letter word that starts with an F.
That's a fairly recent book, isn't it?
Yeah, by Mark Manson, who I really love his stuff. It's more philosophical, I would say, than business. But there's a section in there he calls the value of suffering. And what he said in there was constant positivity is a form of avoidance and not a valid solution to life's problems. And the reason why I think that that's important for your decision making is I think people have this, including myself, like we want to do things that make us happy all the time. And happiness is like one of those things that I feel like you get from working for things and earning things. And it's doing things that are challenging that actually give you fulfillment in accomplishing those things. So just pursuing things that, hey, it doesn't have to get you like super, super lit up to do something. If you really think about like, hey, am I not wanting to do this because I don't think that I would enjoy 100% of it? Or am I looking at this like, hey, how can I enjoy the journey of whatever this thing is that I'm doing, this milestone we need to cross in our business or a relationship or whatever it might be, and looking at what can I gain from this instead of what's going to make me happy all the time.
Mm-hmm. So what's the next thing for you right now on your vision or your dream board?
I don't really, like our business is so new right now. I don't really have like long-term goals set aside for it yet. So like in the next 3 to 6 months, what we're most focused on is hiring a really, really solid project manager. Our business right now, we have 5 people that work for us right now. And we really are getting to a point where there's a little bit too much for Sarah and I to handle in terms of all the tasks associated with our clients and deliverables. So we're really looking for a project manager that's going to eventually be someone that could be a head of operations or VP of operations. And the reason why that's so important to us is that we really want to spend more time, working on our business instead of in the business. And this will help us be able to, take a week or 2 off from the business and not worry about if things are still going to function or not. That's the biggest thing we're focused on.
Jason, tell our listeners how they can follow you, where they can find you, whether it's on LinkedIn or Facebook, or where's the best way to get a hold of you if they want to do that.
Blissfulprospecting.com is going to be the best place. We have a newsletter that we put out each week too. And the newsletter essentially I do anywhere between 5 to 10 hours worth of just consuming content on outbound and growing small businesses and sort of how to do prospecting and sales best practices. And I put that in an email that you can consume in like 5 to 10 minutes. So it's sort of like a Sparks Notes version of everything that I'm consuming and everything that we're working on. That would be a good place to start. So blissfulprospecting.com, and would love to connect with anyone on LinkedIn as well. And that's just Jason Bay if you look me up on LinkedIn.
Well, Jason, I want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy schedule to be with us here today. We'll make sure that in our show notes that can be found at toughdecisions.net on this particular episode. We will make sure that those links are on the show notes so people can, have those direct links to your pages and things like that. But thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule. I look forward to having you on a future podcast as you continue to grow as an entrepreneur.
Cool. Thanks, you too.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Tough Decisions Network. Be sure to visit toughdecisions.net to gain access to show notes for this episode and to join our free weekly entrepreneur email where we will send you news about the latest technology for your business, inspiring quotes, and the latest books for entrepreneurs. That's toughdecisions.net.